All right, hello Krakow, hello everyone. I think it's my first time speaking at Krakow Ruby user group, so thank you for the opportunity. I want to start with defining what is domain-driven design, but first I want to ask you a question. How many of you tried already using domain-driven design with your Rails applications? Okay, that's some number, like, I don't know, 20% maybe of you, which is big. For some reason, Poland is really strong in DDD. I suppose there are some Polish evangelists like Sławek Sobutka or Mariusz Gil, who evangelize domain-driven design in the whole community. If you ask anyone in the DDD community what is DDD, you will receive as many definitions as the people you will ask. So I tried to draw a diagram, okay, what are the usual definitions or terms that exist, and try to group them which belong to domain-driven design, which belong to messaging, and which belong to CQRS. And there's so much of it. That's why it took me 15 years of experimentation to learn DDD. And actually my first attempt to domain-driven design in Rails 15 years ago was with things like repositories, entities, aggregate routes. Anyone tried that? Because I did, and I failed. Because the reason everyone starts with those patterns is that they are in the first chapters of the book, of the blue book called Domain-Driven Design. So everyone starts with repositories, entities, and so on. And if you are trying to approach DDD with Rails and you start using repositories, you end up, let's say, surrounding all your active records with repositories, which doesn't really make much sense because active record is already a repository. But the actual issue is a bit deeper, so we will get into this. So what I want to focus today is, let's say, where I am in this journey, where I suggest you might be interested in looking at. So those green things, I believe, are the most important things if you want to start, but also if you want to use DDD in your existing Rails applications. So not only from when you start from scratch. So I want to focus especially on domains, process managers, and read models. Those are the three most important things. And as you can see, they don't really, not all of them belong to the precise definitions. So read models is not per se a part of domain-driven design. I'm gonna simplify it a bit and I will say this is part of domain-driven design. The same with events. It's not really part of the domain-driven design definition, but let's assume it is. But before we go into DDD, let's talk about the Rails way, because that's what connects us. We are all using Rails, and many of us, or most of us, are using the Rails way. So what I mean by that is the active record approach. So we have a model per table, and we basically were database-driven in our approach to our architectures, which is good because it simplifies a lot, and by conventions we can get quite far. But it also creates certain coupling. So especially with has many belongs to, you can get from each model to every else models. So this is where we also divert from the actual definition of the word model in terms of domain-driven design and the word model as we use it in Rails. In Rails, we basically mean a database table represented as a Ruby object, or a row represented as Ruby object, and domain-driven design is usually a collection of classes that are creating certain model, like in modeling approach. Usually in the Rails way approach, if you get into bigger application, let's say around 100 different active record types, you will get performance issue and complex views where you query and join several tables, which are huge. So many successful Rails applications, sooner or later they will get to some performance issues. Also concurrency issues, because if you lock the table for certain writes or for certain reads, you basically lock the whole table, and those tables are usually huge in the Rails applications. And there are also ownership problems. So if you have an application with, let's say, 200 active records, a similar number of controllers, service objects, and so on, when something is broken, you would like to say, hey, this team is responsible for this. In a Rails application, it's not so easy. It's not impossible. It's not so easy to say, hey, this part belongs to you and this to someone else. And of course, we all saw active records which are over 50 columns. Usually it's the user class, and usually it's one other class that you have in your project. who has the biggest number of columns in your active records? Like anyone with 100 columns? Wow, okay, okay. So two people, 3 people, okay. So yeah, that's usually the number. As you can imagine, it's not perfect, right? It's not such a pleasure to work with such good objects. Rails gives us layers, but doesn't really give us modules. So that's a big deal. So we have the lack of vertical split in Rails. And the business logic very often is implemented as callback hell. Of course, you can see I love callbacks. I will try to show you how we can replace them with process managers today. And now, of course, it has to happen at every meetup and every conference, AI. If we have such a big model as like such a big module as all active records together in a Rails application, this context is usually too big for an agent to actually grasp it, to actually consider all the nuances that you have all of this connected. Especially that even if you don't have a connection, we Rails people are really good at just calling some class methods on other classes, on other modules. We just cross the boundaries very often. So the agents, they have too much context there. Which brings us to the topic of modularity. And I don't remember where I found this definition, but it is with me for the last 20 years or so. Modularity is basically separation plus composability. And I think we need that in bigger Rails applications. In smaller Rails applications, it doesn't matter. But in bigger Rails, it's important. And we need that for AIs, and we need it for humans. We need multiple small modules that compose together easily so that the AI can grasp it, but also we as humans can grasp it. The big discussion nowadays, of course, is around how much we can use AI, how much you can rely, how much it hallucinates, whether we should review the code that AI generates or not. And probably we'll have some heated discussions about it over the next 2 days, right? I think, and this is my prediction, but of course, with AI, I believe no one knows what we are doing. No one can predict anything about it. We don't know what's going to happen in the next year. So this is just my prediction. I believe that the importance of us as architects is going to be bigger. Especially in this crowd, I believe many of us here are, let's say, seniors or more experienced people. So it's usually on us that we have to review the AI PR. Pull requests, which are also generated by AI very often. Someone has to control the chaos, and it's very often us. So this role grows. And I believe that domain-driven design is the missing part of our Rails equation, especially now in the era of AI. I myself, I'm coding with agents since March 2025, which is actually a nice story because I started using Cloud Code exactly 1 year ago, exactly at this conference. I was at the workshop where I first decided, okay, I'm going to give it a try. It was a workshop about implementing Ruby gems by Samuel. And I said, well, okay, let me try what Cloud Code can do. And it was actually amazing, and my jaw dropped. Because it was in a small scope of a very small gem. It did very well already 1 year ago. But to be honest, I'm not sure like how you see it. I'm 30 years in this industry. This is the most revolutionary year in my whole career. And this March 2025 feels like 10 years ago to me. And I've never seen such a revolution since, like, ever. I've vibe coded many applications since December 2025, which is also probably a very important milestone. Everyone took a holiday break in December and started using agents more and more. So I started using it more for vibe coding as well. And I developed RKNC dashboard, a dashboard for our company, where it helps me, track our stuff basically for me as a person who manages this company. And I tried to vibe code using the Rails way, so I just allowed, okay, whatever you know about doing Rails applications, just please do. I need this feature, this feature, this feature. It's mostly for displaying information. And I hit the wall in this application with vibe coding in 2 segments, let's say, 2 aspects. One of them was performance. It went to, because it's very query heavy, so displaying the dashboard with many charts at one page, it wasn't able to optimize it. I just said, hey, Cloud, now give it a try. Now let's try again, make it faster, and it wasn't able to do so. And the second aspect of a failure here with vibe coding was business complexity. Certain areas in my business are very, let's say, time window oriented. So there are many exceptions how we invoice our clients and so on for different time windows, and wasn't really able to implement it without my very detailed guidance. And as a company, and me myself, we help companies which hit the wall with Rails application. So I have seen many big applications, and usually it took 2 to 5 years for a bigger team to get to the point of 100 active records and start getting it more complex and problematic. And now it can happen in 5 days. So this is a big change, and I already seen because things are vibe coded now so quickly. Rails Event Store is a tool that we developed and we released 11 years ago for helping Rails applications to use DDD and use events and CQRS. And this is a project called e-commerce. It's part of the Rails Event Store organization at GitHub, where the main application is a, let's say, Shopify-like platform, multi-tenant, very simplified, of course, but also all the modules are there. It's inventory, order fulfillment, and so on. So, like, it's basically a very simplified ERP system as well. And one year ago, I started using Claude in this project, and over this last year, I developed some skills for this project. So now AI helps me build this project, which is like idealistic domain-driven design, idealistic event sourcing, and so on. So this is like idealistic, not really production system. It's mostly for educational purposes. This idealistic architecture that is used, and I'm going to explain now in this application, is resulting in a big number of small modules which have very clean interface, thanks to DDD and thanks to event-driven approach, which gives me speed and confidence when it comes to cooperating with AI, because I give a very specific work to the AI what to do and how to implement it. This is the most important architectural diagram here. And as you can see, I have used 3 main building blocks that I've used in this application. And I believe those 3 main building blocks are also existing in your applications. And those are read models, a concept which is not so popular. How many of you have used read models? Okay, that's good. Again, Poland is amazing. I delivered this speech already in Chicago, in Paris, in Bangkok, in India, and DDD is like most popular here in Poland. So that's nice. Then we'll talk about domains and process managers. And I will try to explain to you how it's possible to have small modules thanks to those building blocks. And I have in this application, this specific application has 16 read models, 20 process managers, 14 domains. So it's 50 modules. Each of them is not bigger than a few hundred lines of code. So we are talking about this size of module, tiny, right? But nicely separated L, and I believe it's well composable. So let's talk about read models, and those of you who have shorter attention span, this is the 3 minutes where I want you to focus, because that's probably the most useful technique that you can get out of this presentation. Read models can be applied to any Rails application without going crazy with DDD, and this is very useful for speeding up your application very often, and modularizing as well. So what is a read model? This is an order view for this e-commerce application. It's one page with some buttons, and you can see this page is, let's say, split it into some sort of order header and order items list. And the concept of a read model is that you could have one read model for both of those things, but actually they seem like slightly different, so I made them 2 different read models. So I wanted to show you just one example where in one page you have 2 read models, which are basically like something like a Rails view, but it's denormalized view backed by a database table, as we do with active record. So this is another view, another read model. This is a basic list of customers. We have a customer name, we have a button to promote a customer to a VIP, and we have a summary of paid orders. And we have a database table which backs this view, and it's not only for performance reasons, it's also for modularity reasons. So we are denormalizing the data in the read model. You can imagine somewhere else, maybe in some active record, we will have order value. Somewhere else we will have whether it's a VIP or not. So this data is actually duplicated. And that's something that for us Rails people doesn't come easily, because we are so getting used to don't repeat yourself, right, to dry, that we don't like to repeat the columns. But for modularity and performance reasons, it's sometimes very useful. So just to show you from the higher perspective, I have app/read models in my Rails application. And this is one part of the implementation, but the whole read model is 80 lines of code without the actual HTML. And going step by step, we have a module called customers. So we are using Ruby modules for the actual modularity here. We are using active record. So we have a customer class only specific to this view, to this read model. But we are immediately making it private constants. You know what is private constant, right? But it's not very popular technique in our community as well, because we actually don't want this active record to ever be leaked outside of this module. We never want to allow anyone, including AI, to access it. That's a private implementation detail of this module. So we are hiding this customer active record from the outside, but we are using it internally. And the way we are using it is we are reacting to events. I'm going to show you what is an event soon. It's a very simple data structure. So we say, hey, whenever customer register happens, that's the first line, let's execute a handler called register customer. So we are basically reacting to 4 different events that are happening in the system. And each event handler is a very small code like this, where we just update one column in this active record. So whenever whenever we make the customer a VIP, then we execute this code. So you can also look at read models as a cache which always invalidates. So we kind of solve the problem of invalidation by always doing this. So read model as input takes events, and as output gives us some data, right? That's the most important thing. If you want to remember one thing, that was this. But now, how do we get the events in our system? We have read models which consume events. How do we get the events? And they are coming from domains, which I like to use a metaphor. Domains are like business departments. So we have like a sales department, marketing department, taxes department, shipments department, people responsible for CRR, for client relations, and so on. So those are departments. The read models, as you saw, uses active record. Read models uses Rails, right? Because active record is useful. In domains, this is completely unrelated to Rails. It's completely orthogonal. It doesn't even require Rails. And in this project, I run tests without using Rails. So it's just Ruby. Let's look at inventory code. 220 lines of code, so very tiny, responsible for inventory, so for tracking that some product was supplied to the inventory, let's say, and then it was decreased or increased with quantity. So a very simple concept, very tiny concept. So usually this concept already exists in your products table, where you have quantity column probably, which you just increase and decrease, right? So now we are taking this column out of this product table. We are putting in another module. It might be an overkill, but actually you modularize it. You make it a very well defined module and with very well defined responsibility. So for each such domain, which it could be in app/domains, for example, we have commands, events, and we have what I use a pattern, the aggregate root. And we have a command, which is a very simple data structure saying what thing is supposed to happen. So we are just asking the department, hey, could you supply this product ID with this quantity? And if it's successful, it says, yeah, everything went fine, stock level changed. So we are publishing an event. So an event happens as a reaction to this. So we have such an aggregate root, which is just responsible for publishing events. But this is an implementation detail. You can implement it in many different ways. You can implement it using some functions. There are many different approaches, and actually many teams experiment here, including me as well, with different paradigms. So this was domain. So the domain takes commands as the input and event as output. And this is important algebra here, because the read models, they take events as the input, right? Now, the missing part is who is producing commands. the obvious one place where commands are produced are the users. So from the Rails controller, we get a command. But another place where a command can be executed is in the business processes that we need to have implemented. Our own system sometimes internally has to make a decision to do something, and internally we will initialize a command and execute it. So that's what process managers are for, and this is where the most fun happens in this application. Read models are, actually all the building blocks are very trivial, I would say, very easily testable, very well-defined input and output. But the process manager is the thing that actually orchestrates your business processes. And this is what definitely lacks in most of the Rails projects, where this kind of business logic is splitted across service objects, models, and callbacks. And usually you have to track many different classes. So a process manager tries to encapsulate that in one place. And the structure of a process manager is the following. We have a state class, so we have to have some kind of data that represents what is the state of the class. We're going to use a shipment process, so shipping the order to the customer as an example here. So this is the first step. We need to have some sort of state, very simple data structure. It can be just a 1 Boolean flag or 2 Boolean flags, whether it was shipped or not, whether the address was added or not, so very basic thing. Then we need to subscribe to certain events, because business processes, and this is also where the nice thing happens, that business, actually when they define business processes without even thinking that it's going to be implemented by programmers later, they think in terms of certain expectations. So business processes is usually certain tasks that needs to happen and certain expected steps that needs to happen. So those events are basically those steps. This is very close to how business thinks with this event. So shipping can happen when the address is added, when the order is registered, when the order is confirmed, and when the offer is registered. Let's say that's the requirements for actually confirming the shipment. Now is the actual state machine within the process manager, which says, hey, if we are in this state machine and this, if our current state is in this shape, register the shipment and submit the shipment, which is basically sending commands. Or if we are in this other subset of possible state, we do something else. And those are the implementations. So we are just initializing a command and we are sending the command to be executed. So this way we closed the cycle. We have the way of events which are produced by domains, but by domains. Comments are executed by controllers or by process managers, and then read models are the final state of getting the data. So this is the basic flow. And let me now show you with some arrows how this flow looks like when we see it all together. So this is a controller. There's a create action, and there is a create customer command, which is initialized as part of this action. That's bigger picture of how it looks like. So we are executing this flow in the controller. So such a basic data structure is created, a command, and this command is sent to the specific domain, in this case to the CRM, because we are calling it in a CRM module. As a result, the CRM module publishes an event called CRM customer registered. So it's like a confirmation, because usually it's a success scenario here. Then what happens is this event, read model is interested in subscribe to this event, and process manager is interested. In read model, we saw that in the customers. So of course, it just changes some, or creates maybe some record in the internal active record, and that's it. But the process manager, whenever we have a customer registered in our e-commerce platform, we want to onboard them. And in the current implementation, onboarding means sending them a welcome message using the internal communication system. So we have a communication domain where we send the command of send welcome message. And as you can imagine, this domain responds with welcome message sent. So this process can also subscribe to this event so that it never sends the same command twice. And that's the whole cycle. This whole combination of things results in also in updating the read model. So when the index action is called and it wants to show the list of customers, we just call customers.customer for store, and we display all the customers, right? So it's already in the read model. So that's how we grab the read model. You can see we don't access the customer active record directly. We are using a facade method on a module. And that's the whole flow with all the arrows together. And most of the typical features, including the complex ones with processes, is the same pattern and the same. You can implement all of them this way. Of course, it's not like the only way, but this scheme, this structure of thinking can get you really far. And if this can get you really far, it can get your AIs also quite far. I want to talk also about archetypes, because that's a modern and useful thing, and also it grew in the importance in the age of AI. Archetypes are similar to a concept of generic domains. So if you look back, those domains at the bottom, they are very generic. Actually, there's a big chance that many of you have those domains in your application. You have a concept of price, you have a concept of customer, you have a concept of inventory, you have a concept of invoices. Most of B2B applications, they have this, right? So even though I implemented those domains for my application, for the e-commerce Shopify-like platform, there is a big chance we can just copy and paste this code into your application and it can be reused because it's very isolated from anything else. And archetypes are one concept further. Archetypes is more like thinking about such domains as in something generic that can be mapped into your application. Because the problem with something being very generic is that if I copy the code into your application, suddenly you will have, instead let's say you have a bookstore e-commerce, and maybe you would like to have a book as the class and book sold as a event. And suddenly if I bring you my code, it will be more like very generic product sold or very generic names that maybe you don't like. So with the archetypes way of thinking, we can tell AI, hey, I'm going to use this reusable domain, this generic domain, but please remap it to my vocabulary and just copy and paste this. So that's something that is actually in the world of domain-driven design is quite modern, quite recent. In the last years, it grew in their interest, and that's something that we can use in the Rails community too, because many of us are solving the same problem over and over again, and we can actually start building some reusable solutions. And the last topic, I believe, from me today is mutation testing, which is unrelated to domain-driven design exactly, but Mutant keeps agents from misbehaving. Are you familiar with the tool called Mutant? Have you heard about it? Okay, like half the room. So there is a tool called Mutant in our community. It's developed by Markus Schürp, a programmer from Germany. And actually this tool exists for many years now. And it was very expensive to use it. But last week, I convinced Markus to drop the price. So it's more affordable. It's still expensive, but more affordable, let's say. And what it gives you is basically like simple COF, but much stronger. So with simple COF, you have line coverage. And with simple COF, you can get 100% of coverage. Then let AI refactor your code, and suddenly you have bugs. And with Mutant, it's not going to happen. Like 99% confidence there. With simple COF, it's like I would say 70% confidence. I can show you some code which is covered with simple COF, and it claims to be 60% test coverage, and then Mutant comes and says, hey, you have 18%. So that's the difference. Mutant is much more strict in testing your actual coverage. So yeah, that's my combination of using Rails, DDD, and AI, and Mutant together. This repository, which I mentioned, called e-commerce, you can clone it to your laptop. You can run Claude. And I did my best to describe everything in Claude MD with README files in skills that you can ask any question related to DDD and Rails and how it works together by just asking question in Claude. It's actually, that was a surprise to me how good it is if you want to learn DDD this way. So just clone this repository and start asking questions. Like, for example, here I asked, can you explain how does it happen that invoices are created in this application, at which moment and which events are involved? It analyzed for like 1 minute, and it got me this response with describing which pieces are involved, but also it gave me this nice diagram, which events happen in which order, which process manager is involved, and which read model in the end is updated. So AI is amazing in this way of teaching us what is happening and teaches us certain techniques. That's it from me. Thank you very much. And as I still have your attention, I'm one of the organizers of the Wrocław RB conference, which happens next month in Wrocław in Poland. We have 4 workshops planned on Friday. One of them is about mutation testing. And we have Saturday and Sunday as two days of talks. One of the talk on Saturday is about event sourcing and actor model in Ruby, so that's also related to those topics. So please come to Wrocław and see you there as well. Thank you. And I believe we have time for 1 or 2 questions. So. Yeah.
So as you've said, the e-commerce is an idealistic approach to DDD. So my question is, how often the reality lets you use it, so at your customers' code bases, and which elements are more used, which are less used in practice?
Yeah, so this repository is like an inspiration for our client projects, not only for our client projects. And it's not that often that we get to actually copy and paste the code, but very often we see similar mechanisms, similar archetypes, similar process managers. And we are lucky in this meaning that, when any random programmer at any random company decides, hey, I'm going to introduce domain-driven design in the project, well, it's not going to be easy for you. We are in this position that we are often brought in order to introduce domain-driven design, because the companies, they want it, they ask for this. So in this meaning, how often we are actually introducing events and domains and process managers, basically every day, because that's our specialty.
You're called for that.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, I have a question about consistency, because with read models, and because they're denormalized, there can be the same state between different models. Like how to handle that in DDD, because I think keeping it all in one transaction is not, it's like an abstraction leak, or is it handled with other events that roll back the changes, or how does it work?
Yeah, consistency is of course difficult. So when we introduce read models in existing Grace applications, which already have some views, which display some data, and we introduce a read model, we use this concept of dual write. So for some time you have both. We introduce a read model, we introduce events, we let the read model to be populated with data, and in the production system it's still not turned on. What we do is we compare all the time and we log all the differences. So when in the process of replacement, that's how we solve consistency, but that's not full answer here. And by the way, that's one story we had with one of our clients where we started, because we very often start with read models, to solve a performance problem of a monthly report data. And we started introducing events, we started populating the data, and we started comparing. And after some perfections and optimizations, we still had a mismatch. So the data that was shown by the Rails application, by the Rails views, was still different than our. So we thought we still do something wrong, and we asked the business people, hey, what is happening here? And they analyzed it and they said, oops, we had actually a bug in this previous implementation. So the events, they exposed the actual true, and which meant they actually didn't charge their client enough money. So this was, let's say, it was more consistent in the business meaning. But I know your question was about consistency in terms of how do we make sure we update on every change. And that's the difficult part. You have to first make sure that all the places where your column could change, you have this surrounded or enhanced with a publishing an event. So this doesn't come for free, and there is not like silver bullet solution. This is a very difficult problem. And yes, at the beginning we do it with one transaction, as long as it's possible. If it's like high traffic application, it's not possible. But if it's allowed, then we would use it in one transaction, because then we have at least publishing the event as part of the same transaction as the active record is changed. So we have consistency in this meaning. But in those places where it's not possible, we use Rails Event Store. And Rails Event Store has a concept of outbox. Outbox is a pattern which solves the problem of solve the typical concurrency problems and consistency problems. So with Outbox, you have asynchronous approach to updating or handling or reacting to events. And then you have like a guarantee that it's going to happen eventually. So that's the concept of eventual consistency. So it's a big answer, because your question is actually the most difficult one to answer. Thank you. Yeah.
If I understand this correctly, events can generate more events and trigger further domain logic. At the beginning, you mentioned the callback hell and how painful it is, which I totally agree with. But can you explain what exactly makes this chain of events, triggering events, more understandable than callback hell? I think I understand it intuitively, but I'd like to hear more educated explanation.
I can show you more process managers later, but most importantly is the process manager code, which is not precisely events producing new events, it's events producing new commands, and commands produce new events, right? Because they go to the domain. And you try to group these producing events into, let's say, concepts that make sense from the business perspective, like customer onboarding, shipment process, everything that is actually happening for some longer time even. But here is encapsulated. So here is a combination of 4 events that together will produce one command or 2 commands, which then will result in another 2 events. So sometimes the flow is actually quite, you will make 3 circles sometimes. First of all, I can show you some more examples, but also I would advise you to go to this application and use Claude to explain to you, because the more processes you will have explained in more detail that you could see in your IDE, the easier it gets. And there is more examples, like when is invoice created? That's something that would be handled by a callback, right? When is reservation of products happening, and how exactly does it work? How availability works? Those are usually the things that we would do in callbacks. And usually those things will be scattered across many files. And here we try to capture them in one file, in one module. And it's not easy. Very often you have to understand how business looks at it in order to implement it exactly the same. Not all domains are easy. E-commerce is relatively easy, right? But not all of them are easy. Like insurance is super complicated, or logistics is super complicated, right? Those are different domains. Hey, Apotonic. You really have a question?
Thanks for the presentation, Andrzej. I guess this is half a joke, but I wanted to hear from you what you think about 37 Signals Basecamp way of architecting code and why you think it works for them.
Last month, we looked at our company at Fizzy, the code base from 37 Signals, with the idea, let's criticize it. It's actually a very nice code base, I have to admit. So the 37 Signals way of coding is interesting too. I would say the Rails way, as we see in our industry, and I get to see many code bases, so I have some good overview, it's completely different than the Rails way that 37 Signal does. It's not the same. They are maybe the true Rails way, and we are not able to repeat the patterns. Fizzy is beautiful internally. I recommend you to look at Fizzy, but they use concerns very heavily. How many of you use concerns and love concerns very heavily? It's 3 people, 2 people. Yeah, it's a concept. Concerns are, in a way, in academical object-oriented programming, concerns are multiple inheritance. It makes sense. If you use it wisely, it can exist, right? What they do is also different because they avoid the problem of huge tables. They don't have so many huge tables because they actually do something similar to DDD. They're actually not that far from DDD as we expected, because they really try to capture every single thing as a concept, give it a class, make it an active record, but make it a separate table. So they actually are doing something different. We always end up with 50 columns or 100 columns, and they keep it tiny. But okay, Fizzy is still a very tiny application. So it's easy for them. There's no complex business logic. And for example, there is a concept of golden tickets. I was looking how they implement the processes. And this is against, so I don't think they solved it nicely. The processes, I would, with this approach, it would be slightly nicer, I believe. But to be honest, yeah, at Fizzy code base, it's quite good. I wouldn't do it this way, but I can imagine this can work. It's going to get work. But again, I don't think 37 signals projects are as huge as many of you are working on, because many of you are from Zendesk, many of you are from big projects where you have, let's say, over 100 active records, and they are actually smaller. So 37 signals is, it's amazing. They gave us Rails, and I'm not sure they are the ones to advise us how to deal with large Rails applications. Nick, you want a question?
I will get my steps in.
That will be the last one, okay?
Okay, last question from the main hero.
Thank you for your talk. Every time one puzzle piece falls into place about DDD. So my question is, process manager, is that something from DDD or is it something you came up with? Because I've skimmed through the DDD book and I didn't see process manager, only bounded context.
No, basically nothing that I showed you today is like some sort of my invention or RKNC invention. Process manager is in the second part of the domain-driven design book, so no one gets there. Together with bounded context and domains. So everyone focuses on aggregates, rules, on repositories, and so on. But yeah, it's definitely a very classic pattern of DDD.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much.